These men are building ships. These are their weapons of war: the drill, the rivet, and the blowtorch, and that giant crane swinging high out over the yards.
As new military technologies are developed every day and the landscape of modern warfare seemingly changes faster than most are able to keep up with, it is a perfectly reasonable question to wonder what happens to the older military hardware that is now obsolete, especially when it comes to massive structures such as aircraft carriers. My question is, what happens specifically to warships that are no longer needed? Well, there are numerous paths that an outdated ship can follow, but one popular destination for ships that the US Navy has no immediate use for is the Mallows Bay in the Potomac River. Here, there are hundreds of vessels laying dormant in the water, waiting to be scrapped or sunk. This is commonly known as the Ghost Fleet of the Mallows. An interesting, extensive collection of history with a location that deserves to be explored. So today, we discover the history of the Ghost Fleet at Mallows Bay. I'm your host, Ryan Socash, and you're watching It's History. This video is brought to you by Raid Shadow Legends, a gut-wrenching RPG where you will save the world of Teleria, recruit the most legendary warrior champions from the forces of light and darkness, and have the adventure of a lifetime. My favorite bit of super tough content was the huge Doom Tower, which is basically a giant prison. The Arbiter fought a pack of really nasty bad guys a long time ago, but she wasn't strong enough to take them out for good, so instead, she locked them up in a massive super tower until she figured out how to deal with them. You'll build an army of champions to get to the top, but remember, a couple of bosses need specific mechanics to beat them. Like the Scarab King, he takes barely any damage unless you reduce his max HP, and if you attack him without a shield buff on, he'll wreck your whole team fast. I could go on for ages, but the real fun is trying things out and experimenting for yourself. I loved the immersive experience, the astonishing graphics, and the interactive nature of the game. Seriously, if you're home, bored, and with a phone, this is your solution. Raid just released a giant new feature, Awakening, and a brutal new dungeon, the Iron Twins Fortress. If you're good enough to take down the Iron Twins, you'll see a huge payoff, being able to awaken your champions. There's also big news. Raid has just released a super-powered legendary version of everybody's favorite champion, Death Knight. The whole Raid community has been waiting for this for a long time. Ultimate Death Knight is everything we'd hoped for. He's poised, he's powerful, he's perfect, and the best part is everyone can get him free just by logging in. All you have to do is log in and play Raid for 7 days between now and October the 27th, and you'll add Ultimate Death Knight to your collection easy. There's seriously never been a better time to get started, but there's more. You can also use the DK Rises promo code for a bunch of free items to instantly level your strongest champion all the way to level 50, 5-star ascension. The promo code is available for both new and existing players, and if you haven't started playing Raid yet, click my link in the description or scan my QR code here on the screen. You'll get unique bonuses worth $30, and for new players, we're talking a free epic champion Tyrell, 200,000 silver, 1 energy refill, 1 XP booster, and 1 ancient shard, so you can summon awesome champions as soon as you get in-game. Mallows Bay stores many old and antiquated American ships dating back to the Revolutionary War. However, the vast majority of ships that lay in the water here are from World War I, which was more commonly referred to as the Great War at the time. Of the 200 ships at Mallows Bay, hundreds of these vessels came from a government-funded project to mass-produce ships in order to support the war effort. But obviously, this program didn't pan out for several reasons, and the remnants now lay dormant as shadows of their former selves. You see, when war broke out across Europe in 1914, after the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, the entire continent, as well as many areas across the globe, were plunged into a massive war. Arguably the worst conflict the world had seen up until that point. While the United States was not yet the world's undisputed superpower, it was still a regional leader in the Americas and was recognized as a rapidly rising power. As a result, it quickly became a possibility that the US would enter the Great War. Despite President Wilson running his re-election campaign on the basis of neutrality and winning, he knew that if something major occurred, the US may have to finally take part, and therefore, he prepared. This sentiment was accelerated with the enactment of Germany's policy of unrestricted submarine warfare, which transformed merchant ships into prime targets for the deadly German U-boats. As a response and as a precaution, President Wilson created a rapid shipbuilding program that would construct a massive number of American ships, reinvigorating the Navy. So as 1917 came around, the situation would deteriorate swiftly. In particular, after the sinking of the RMS Lusitania at the hands of a German U-boat, which killed over 100 Americans. And this was compounded by the interception of the Zimmermann Note. So anti-German sentiment had grown so large that Congress officially declared war on the Central Powers. And obviously, Wilson's plan to build more ships was put into overdrive. Immediately following the American declaration of war, the United States Shipping Board established the Emergency Fleet Corporation to construct a plethora of ships in a short span of time. This was made possible using their extensive network of 40 shipyards in 17 states. You see, they were tasked with building as many ships as possible, but also attempting to maintain a low cost. So many plans were conceived. And as I'm sure you know, most ships of that time were made of steel, but with shortages of steel, the Emergency Fleet Corporation had to find alternative materials to build their warships. As we've looked at before in several videos on this channel, one avenue was concrete ships. However, another low-cost option was constructing ships from wood. Seriously, the corporation had ambitious plans to create a fleet of 734 wooden steamships to support the war effort, with most of these wooden vessels meant to serve as merchant ships that transported valuable supplies across the Atlantic to U.S. troops overseas or American allies. This plan was also beneficial given that wooden ships could be put together much quicker than normal steel ships, not to mention that the U.S. has a massive supply of timber. Paradoxically, the large plan that the Emergency Fleet Corporation had set out never came to fruition, as long delays and a shortage of available workers saw insufficient amounts of timber arrive at the shipyards. The shipyards themselves were also understaffed and underpaid, making construction slow and behind schedule. So when World War I came to a close, a mere 98 of the intended 734 ships were actually constructed. Then, out of those 98 ships, only 76 were able to carry cargo, and those were riddled with issues, from mechanics to construction shortcomings. In the end, not a single one of these ships ever sailed to Europe. However, this ultimately did not have a negative impact on the war effort, as the US was still able to maintain a large and effective navy, and in general, the American entry into the war was the catalyst that led to victory. The war came to a close only about a year and a half after American troops set foot on European soil, meaning that the fleet of wooden ships was never needed, even if they were built on time. But still, with the war over, the shipping board had a new issue at hand. What were they to do with the fleet of 98 unused wooden ships? The first thing they did was appoint a special committee to sell these ships, which were already obsolete, hastily put together, and many were simply incomplete. All the same, a scrapping organization from Alexandria, Virginia, called the Western Marine and Salvage Company, came and bought most of the fleet and transported them to the Potomac River. And this next part serves as a shocking illustration of wasted government money. You see, the overall project cost the US government around $300 million, and yet they sold it to Western Marine for less than $750,000. The company was able to salvage some very valuable materials from each ship, but once there was nothing left to take, something had to be done about the hulls. The empty shells of these wooden ships were just sent down the river to their final resting place in Mallows Bay. Now, the bay was already crowded, and hence, to make extra space, 31 of these vessels were intentionally set on fire on November the 7th, 1925, in what would become the greatest destruction of ships in a single event in U.S. naval history. Over the next few years, Mallows Bay became a dumping ground for many old or abandoned ships, and by 1931, Western Marine and Salvage Company had amassed over 169 ships in that location. However, the effect of the Great Depression took its toll, and the prospect of the entire project went down as the decline in scrap values plummeted. Western Marine and Salvage Company themselves went bankrupt over time, leaving the ship graveyard to the local scavengers and scrappers. When the Second World War broke out, however, there was a resurgence of attention aimed at the Ghost Fleet at Mallows Bay. For a second time, massive conflict had engulfed the world yet again. The US had initially remained a neutral power, just like before, but in December of 1941, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, pulling the US in. With the official declaration of war against the Axis powers, the US organized a massive war effort domestically, and the Ghost Fleet at Mallows Bay now had another role to play. With the Western Marine and Salvage Company now gone, the federal government built a new organization called the Salvage Section of the Metals Reserve Company. Their purpose was to collect valuable materials in order to support the war effort. This new company then employed the Bethlehem Steel Corporation to explore the Ghost Fleet at Mallows Bay to scrap anything, particularly types of metals, from these old ships, to help fund new ships meant to serve in combat. From the start of this new company until the war's end in 1945, the Bethlehem Steel Corporation discovered a large amount of valuable metal in these old vessels and sent them up to their facilities in Baltimore, where they were put to good use. But with the invasion of Berlin and the atomic bomb being dropped, the Second World War came to an end, with the US playing a vital role in Allied victory yet again. Sadly, for Mallows Bay, the end of the war also meant this salvage yard would fall into total obscurity. In 1945, a company named Idemont Incorporated bought Mallows Bay, and it looked like the Ghost Fleet's days were numbered, as this corporation intended to remove all the hulls over the next few decades. Yet, in a strange turn of events, the Ghost Fleet would live on to fight another day, as the plans eventually fell through. Originally, the company looked to clear the bay of all the old ships by the 1960s, but their plans were stopped in their tracks when a massive scandal hit. It was eventually uncovered that Idemont was in fact a straw company for the Potomac Electric Power Company, and they were simply using the shell as a front to clear the land and make space for a power generation station in the area. Once the scandal was exposed, they lost their ownership rights to the bay. After the controversy subsided, the Ghost Fleet stayed put and was not removed, but with this, the ships largely remained untouched, just sitting in the water, slowly being reabsorbed by their surrounding nature. It took some time for people to notice, but when they did, the Ghost Fleet now took on a whole new persona as an incredibly unique environment. An unusual hybrid of man-made structures being incorporated into the natural ecosystem, so much so that the House Committee on Government Operations officially declared that a distinctive ecosystem had developed here. Therefore, removing the ships would damage the environment. From this point on, the Ghost Fleet has become a bustling habitat for various types of water-based plants, reptiles, amphibians, fish, and various other forms of life. All this has resulted in the Mallows Bay becoming a tourist attraction, but also a prime target for scientific exploration, fishing, and other outdoor activities such as boating, birdwatching, camping, and hiking. And the fact that this site is only around 40 miles south of the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. means it's easily accessible for the public, as a short ride down the river is all that's needed. Along with the Captain John Smith Chesapeake National Historic Trail, this whole area is under the administration of Charles County, Maryland, who manage the bay and hold the importance of its history close to the heart. They even submitted a nomination to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration to proclaim Mallows Bay a National Marine Sanctuary in 2014. And 4 years later, their wish was granted, solidifying Mallows Bay as a sight to behold for the foreseeable future. Now, if you were to visit the Ghost Fleet, you would experience one of the most beautiful shipwreckage sites in the country, from ships as old as the nation to experimental wooden ships that were built to serve in World War I, but were never used for much other than a large ecosystem of wildlife. Mallows Bay is home to a plethora of ships, but when viewing these old vessels, it's also important to consider the story behind each one, as its only legacy that might outlive a physical object. And with that, I'll leave you to enjoy our playlist about the history of ships, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button, consider hitting join to support the channel, and if you have episode ideas, hit me up on Instagram. Until next time, this is Ryan Socash, signing off.